Okay, okay. Well, we've had on the graph of this month's watching brief, we've gone sort of serious, not so serious, serious, and hopefully now not so serious, in so much as not so grim. But actually, in many respects, a very serious topic, and that is the reconstruction of visages, human faces from the past. There's an article that's been making the rounds in January to do with the reconstruction of the face of a teenage girl from 9,000 years ago. It's the remains that were found, Mesolithic remains found in a Greek cave in 1993, have been given a up-to-date reconstruction. The skull has been given a 3D printed representation of the face that would have resulted from those remains, as it were, or would have been when the person was alive, if you see what I mean. And
Yep.
and this has led to lots of people having a glib response because she looks a bit scowly. They've given her an expression that's a little bit kind of and they're saying, yeah, teenagers, they've always been the same. Now, I, this is where, on the one hand, I do find that quite a funny comment, but also this is where I'm always fascinated by is this actually part of the value of reconstructing a human face is to allow us to say, well, actually, in some ways things don't change. So maybe actually it's okay to give this teenage Mesolithic girl a scowl, or do you think that potentially actually what we're doing there is we're enforcing an emotional moment on this being that's not really warranted? I mean, what do you think?
I suppose there's nothing really more personal than somebody's face, is there? And I don't know how true it is, but there's certainly that comments that's made that we often make a judgment on whether we like somebody or not within moments of actually seeing them.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's all from physical cues, not from what they're saying.
Yeah.
Um, so obviously, any kind of reconstruction of something like that is both going to be a very intimate, very evocative thing, but it's also going to be a controversial thing because, you know, our faces are such a mobile and characterful part of what we all are
Hmm.
that you know it's like a photograph. Most people hate their passport photograph because it freezes a moment which maybe they don't see themselves as looking like that. They see
Yes.
themselves looking scowly or mad or whatever, and I think that this is a kind of a sort of transference of that idea onto this particular. I find that particular reconstruction really evocative, really characterful. I really like it.
Hmm. Hmm. It is. I mean, it's. She looks as though she's scrutinizing you as a viewer,
Yeah, yeah,
which I quite like. But I suppose what I'm getting at, beyond the fact that yes, of course, it's evocative. By definition, we have someone. This is a process that doesn't automatically happen. There are mathematical formulae for the tissue thickness across the face and on
absolutely.
certain key points. This is one of the ways in which these reconstructions are done based upon the underlying bone structure.
Yeah,
But choices are made about hairstyle, in some cases hair color,
yeah.
obviously the expression. And so,
Yeah,
actually, in some respects, this is not like a passport photo, is it? This is much more like.
it's much more creative because there are elements of ambiguity in the evidence that an expert um, in that field has to make choices,
Hmm.
and the choices they make will be based on their experience and on what is the function of the particular job they're doing. Are they doing something that's a relatively neutral reconstruction? Say, for example, for a police investigation where they've got an unidentified set of human remains that they're doing a reconstruction to try and get an identification.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there you get a fairly neutral representation of the face, like a passport photograph.
Hmm.
Or are they going to do something which is maybe going to try and convey a bit more character, maybe in a museum context, so that it's not just a another object in a case, but it's actually making the underlying statement that this was a person who lived a life and had a personality, and maybe we can just give a hint of that to spark your imagination when you're thinking about them.
Yeah, well, actually, funnily enough, one of my me and Mrs. Soup, one of our hobbies when we're not reflecting intensely on history is actually what is actually watching forensic procedural TV shows. For example, there's one called Forensic Files on Netflix, a whole series of 20-minute episodes, which I think I've talked about previously on this series.
You have, yes. Yeah.
And we really like that stuff because partly because actually the insight that you get into the processes, and one of the processes is actually this idea of forensic reconstruction, and the way that often, especially those who work with clay, see themselves is that they are in part an artist. They are they're working with what is often called non-metric variation. It's what makes people who are from the same region, even from the same family, distinct, is the little things that we as human beings immediately recognise in each other's faces, but which actually, a computer, for example, would have a hard time distinguishing. And I think that's one of the things that I always find interesting about this, is the way that these choices and this playing with this variation in the face leads to these moments of interaction with in this case a face from 9,000 years ago. But I can't help but wonder whether sometimes it's taken into the realm of the absurd or even the slightly bizarre. So, for example, recently, a story which I know you were slightly tickled by is the story of a mummy, an ancestor of the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson.
Yes.
Coming into the news, and a reconstruction of her based upon her remains. Now here, it's worthwhile saying, and I do recommend that people check out the story, either linked below. I like this because it really highlights, I think, one of the good things about a reconstruction is that I think it can add a useful context and barrier to simply looking at someone's remains. Yes. So, for example, there's one version of the story where all you're given really is a picture of Boris and a picture of a fairly poorly mummified human head. You can see the skull, you can see into the orbits of the eyes, whereas actually the version of the story where you have the face reconstructed, I think, is a little less, I don't know, crass, I suppose.
I think, yeah, I mean, and also there are other images that have been released by the researchers, and in fact this has come about because of a documentary that's been made for Swiss television about about this particular discovery, where the woman concerned, who was called Anna Katharina Bischoff, who died in 1787, is shown where she certainly the outer skin tissue is present, and what you have is a desiccated set of human remains, basically.
Now, what do we know if this was the intention of the burial, or is this just an accident of the circumstances?
Well, I mean, there are well-known cases. It's the Capuchin monks, isn't it, in Sicily? Is another one of the cases where certain conditions in the crypts and tombs of churches promote different kinds of preservation, either through desiccation or that a micro environment within a crypt or a coffin promotes preservation, or we have going. This kind of thing goes right back. We have the stories in the Middle Ages of the saint's coffin being opened, and there's the odour of sanctity, and they just as they were when they were buried.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
So I wasn't coughing to mock the idea there, but I was coughing to have a cold. But yeah, absolutely. So a famous local example to me would be, one of my favourite examples would be St Cuthbert, who his coffin was opened and he was uncorrupted.
Exactly.
A very special fellow.
Whereas, in fact, what appears to have happened in the case of Anna Katharina, she was living in Basel. She was the wife of the church minister, in fact, apparently. Uh, what appears to have helped preserve Anna Katerina, at least according to some reports, is the fact that her body contained high levels of mercury. And in the late 18th century, when she was living in Basel, mercury was a treatment for syphilis. And so people have jumped to all sorts of conclusions about her lifestyle. Or the fact that she may have been infected by a relative, her husband maybe. We just don't know.
Or she may have been, as it were, tending to the.
This is the other story that yes, that she was poisoned while attending to the sick.
Yeah.
Which I think is in the sort of I smoked but I didn't inhale kind of school of thing. To be fair, Boris Johnson himself said on Twitter, quote, "I'm very excited to hear about my late great grand mummy in quotes, a pioneer in sexual health care, very proud." So, and that's what's given this story the resonance. An interesting story about a wealthy woman in late 18th century Basel has been given an international spin because she is an ancestor of the current UK Foreign Secretary, who, has to be said, is never slow at exploiting a media opportunity. So,
No. There's that.
He's always Boris is clickbait.
Boris is clickbait, but also as well, we've come full circle in that sense. We've come all the way back to the Bayeux Tapestry, the way in which our connections to continental Europe are many, varied, and wonderfly complex.
Absolutely, and again, Boris makes a great deal of the fact that he himself is part American, part Turkish, part obviously part Swiss. Get back along this particular line. It's a very cosmopolitan family tree that he has, along with many others of us. Not all of us have the opportunity to actually see one of our ancestors like this face to face. Though that's the thing.
No. Although I'm not. It's interesting how I wonder. Because he's taking this with very good humour, as he is wont to do. But I wonder how I would feel if someone did present those remains in relation to me so publicly, if you see what I mean. It's interesting, I guess, because there's no direct memory or connection or emotional thing to appeal to there, but it is nonetheless. This is precisely the reason why we're talking about this reconstruction of human remains. It's a very fine road that they walk, I think, and I'm happy to see that we have people engaging with this science of reconstructing human remains and reconstructing faces based upon human remains in a way that in a variety of ways.
Well, obviously, Julian Richards famously made a whole number of TV series about this with Meet the Ancestors, which, along with Time Team, it was one of the big archaeological series of the 90s. And I think there he hit on a very particular, very winning formula. That meeting the ancestor face to face, even if they're not, technically you can't prove that they're your ancestor, but it is a very evocative. It's far easier to relate to even a well presented story based on a human skeleton or latterly a museum quality reconstruction than it is to relate to your ancestors via a monograph about BB2 pottery.
You have a thing about BB2, don't you?
I'm speaking as a Romanist.
This is just from years of, pun intended, slogging in the trenches, just like, not more BB2. Or do you like BB2?
BB2 is wonderful. Okay. BB2 is absolutely wonderful.
Okay. Obviously there'll be a whole host of people who will be very concerned if you don't like BB2. So we'll move on from that, just in case things get too intense with the BB2 audience. Okay.
I've got nothing. BB2 is essential to proper understanding of BB2 is essential to the study of Roman Britain. It's wonderful stuff. I've got a reproduction piece of it on my mantelpiece as we speak.
Wonderful. I'm glad to hear it.